the top performers, the people who really highest performers on the planet, are those people, those teams, those organizations that not only do great when things are going great, but they do great when things are going poorly. I define the Navy SEALs as this masters of uncertainty. It was never about shooting. It was never about skydiving. It was never about scuba diving. It was always about the fact that we were individuals and teams that could drop into complexity, ambiguity, and uncertainty and perform.
People that perform at a high level have things that make them more likely to produce and to perform and to succeed. Yeah. And I'd really love for you to maybe just give us a brief story of how you came about to some of the attributes that you talk about, and maybe the things that could lead us into a different part of the conversation.
Wonderful. Yeah. So again, 21 years basically in the SEAL teams. Most of my career spent here in this area. And I was an officer, so I was in charge of, I was in charge of a SEAL command and all that stuff. One of my favorite, most enjoyable jobs was I was in charge of the selection assessment program for one of our very specialized commands. And at this particular command, what happens was, it still happens, is you get candidates from all the other SEAL teams to come, and they go through our own 9-month selection process. To be a candidate, you have to have top evals, top scores at your team. You have to be recommended. So you talk about some really top high performing dudes who are coming to our selection. Only about 50% make it through. So there's a 50% attrition rate, which is okay because assessment and selection implies attrition. But what wasn't okay at the time, and when I took over, was that we weren't able to effectively articulate why these guys weren't making it through. And we were saying things like, well, they couldn't do close quarter combat very well, couldn't do this very well. It was all very skills based, and it didn't make sense because these guys were super awesome dudes and they were really high performing. So it felt disingenuous to them. It felt disingenuous to us. I was tasked as the new training officer to help to better articulate what was going on. And to do so, I had to dive into performance. I had to look at performance really deeply. And this is where I really got excited about it. Because what I found was performance is, a lot of it's not visible. It's not about the skills you bring to the table. It's about the qualities you bring to the table. Those things are a little bit more hidden, but that are inherently allow us to do what we do. And so top, and I know we're going to get, and that's the attributes. I know we're going to get into the attributes, but the top performers, the people who really highest performers on the planet, are those people, those teams, those organizations that not only do great when things are going great, but they do great when things are going poorly, right? This is what I call, and I define the Navy SEALs as this, when I was still in there, as masters of uncertainty. It was never about shooting. It was never about skydiving. It was never about scuba diving. It was always about the fact that we were individuals and teams that could drop into complexity, ambiguity, and uncertainty and perform, right? And that's what masters of uncertainty do. And so that's the kicker, and that's the thing that takes the great teams over the top to be the greatest teams. And the ability to do that, part of the thing that you need is to understand the attributes you bring to the table. And so that's really where I got into it. And I'm still kind of really into it.
Yeah. I love how you begin in your book. You talk a little bit about, excuse me, you talk a little bit about the fact that you were talking to this gentleman who wasn't going to make it. And you didn't want to just say he didn't get it. It's just,
right.
He just doesn't get it. It's not enough, but that is what it is. And what's interesting is, in the financial field, for 20 plus years of training and hiring, I can't tell you how many times there were things that you had a conversation. You're like, I just don't think they're going to get it. I don't believe that this individual will get what it takes to make it. And yet they are the smartest, the most interesting individuals that you've ever met. And yet it's a challenge for them.
Yeah, no, it's true. And again, but there's also no judgment there, because when we look at the attributes, and we look at what qualities we all bring to the table, we're all really unique. And the way I kind of describe us as human beings is kind of like the movie Cars. And I love the movie Cars. And it's not because my kids made me watch it 1,000 times, which I know your kids probably did you as well. It's actually a great movie, but it's also, I think, reflective of how we are. We are all automobiles, every one of us, right? But we're different types. Some of us are SUVs, some of us are Ferraris, and some of us are Jeeps. And there's no judgment there, because the Jeep can do things the Ferrari can't do, and the Ferrari can do things the Jeep can't do. But it behooves us, if we want to understand our own performance and understand how we can excel, to lift our hoods and figure out what kind of car we are, what kind of engine we're running with, because we may have, or we may be a Jeep that's trying to run on a Ferrari track, or a Ferrari that's trying to run a Jeep track. And even then, that's not about, if you choose to be a Jeep trying to run a Ferrari track, that's your choice, right? But now you'll know exactly what you're going to need to do to try to keep up with the Ferraris. Or you say, you know what, I should go find a Jeep track, and maybe I'll feel more fulfilled, I'll feel more successful and things like that. So this is where I really kind of dive in, kind of geek out on this attribute stuff.
Yeah, that's awesome. I love the analogy, and I have a nephew who's into cars like no other, and so all my kids' old cars are now passing down to them.
Yeah.
And it is such a great movie. It's one that no matter how many times they watch it, you could still geek out a little bit on it. But I love the analogy because sometimes it's just the self-awareness to know where you are and where you fit best. And that Jeep on the off-road or on the beach is going to be the best vehicle in that space. And what confidence and what success someone can have if they're actually on the right track in the right space with something they love doing.
Yes, absolutely, and that's the key. And I think one of the things I'm really jazzed about, and kind of my focus since getting out of the Navy, was to really help deconstruct this stuff in a way that allowed individuals and organizations to start understanding this. And again, when we do most of our work with organizations, but when we go in an organization, we don't go in and tell them what kind of vehicle they are. We go in and help them figure out what kind of vehicle they are based on the attributes that they bring to the table. Because it's not something I can, know. You have to do it. There has to be some internal dialogue. There has to be some introspection, whether it's individual or organizational. And so we just help them kind of do that introspection, say, oh, wait a second. This is what we are. This is what we're running on. These are our top things. This is what we need to look at. And once you know that, man, I mean, as an individual, you start to understand exactly how and when you can perform. As an organization, what that allows us to help them do is now you can hire the right people, you can fire the right people, you can evaluate performance in the right ways, and you can take your team from good to great or great to even greater. I mean, you can save money in terms of getting the right. I mean, how much money do organizations waste by hiring the wrong people? Because they're a lot of times hiring based on skills, and that's not the way to do it.
Yeah, it's like if they just look at the resume, they're only getting a portion of the story.
That's right.
It's amazing how when you ask questions in an interview and you start to understand the full human, and they start to tell you about resilience, or they start to tell you about a story that just resonates, where that they had to come from something horrible into something great, or how they started from scratch. And all these different things, like you're paying attention to those things and how they respond.
Yes.
And it's amazing in a culture. If you're building a culture, you have to have Jeeps, you have to have Ferraris, you have to have all those different things. I think what's interesting to me when you talk about your past life in the Navy SEALs is that, and as you go into some of these other companies too, there's some careers where you need a little bit of everything. And that's where it becomes really tough, because in some careers you have to be super analytical, but also athletic. And,
it is tough, but I will say this. I will say that every career has a niche and a collection of attributes that's unique to that career. And it's really about figuring that out. And it's never everything. You can't, that doesn't exist, right? Even Navy SEALs, it's like master at or expert at, what is it? Master at jack of all trades, master at none, right? That's what it is, right? But even, and that's, but even that's going to, there are a specific set of attributes that's required to be a SEAL. And so it's really about understanding what that looks like, because the athlete's going to, the attributes that make up a great SEAL team is going to look different than the attributes that make up a great athletic team, or a surgical team, or a sales team, or a team of engineers or architects, right? Those lists are all going to look different and unique to them. And so that's what it takes. And I'll just kind of go back to one of the things you said, because it's interesting. And this idea of, getting the right person and teasing out those intangibles, right? There's a story that it's a SEAL training story that apparently happened before I went to SEAL training. And I know you're friends with some of my friends, so you know the community to that extent. BUDS, Basic Underwater Demolition School, back out in Coronado. Well, I went through BUDS in 1996, and one of the first things you had to do back then when you showed up to BUDS was you had to swim 50 meters, right? So they made you jump in the pool, swim 25 to one end, 25 to the other end. Normal standard swim test, right? Well, the story goes, and again, this happened apparently before I got there, that this kid shows up and it's his turn to swim. And when he jumps in the water, he sinks right to the bottom, and he starts walking across the bottom of the pool to one side, and he walks across the bottom of the pool to the other side, and he comes up and he's gasping for air, and the instructor looks at him and says, "What the hell are you doing?" And the kid, who's still catching his breath, says, "I'm sorry, instructor, I don't know how to swim." And the instructor pauses and looks at him for a second, says, "That's okay, we can teach you how to swim." Right? And why did he say that? He said that because the instructor knew, right, if this kid had the attributes to show up to Navy SEAL training without even knowing how to swim, he had everything he needed to be a Navy SEAL. Teaching him to swim was the easy part. Teaching him the skills was the easy part. So if you have the right attributes, you can always teach the skills.
I love that. I love the way that you could take the mold of how someone is built and make them into something much greater. Sometimes actually showing them how great they can be along the way, because they don't even know that these attributes that they possess are the secret ingredient to major levels of success. And I think back to school. So how old were you in 1996 then?
22, I think. Yeah.
Okay. So you had gone to college and you came right out and went into buds. Okay. So, I graduated high school that year, so we're fairly close in age. And what I remember is going from high school to college and learning about stuff that I really enjoyed, and how the trigger happened where you were like, wow, I really like this. I like reading. I hated reading before. And then you get into business and you're like, wow, entrepreneurism is so interesting. I really excel here. Being ADHD and seeing the world with peripheral really creates all these other avenues that for so long felt like a weakness.
Right.
But it was something that not swimming is just not swimming. Learning to swim is much easier than having to take the kid who's just not able to get from side to side and gives up along the way.
Well, it's one of the things when we talk about attributes. Of course, the book is the book is resonating with a lot of people, and we've gotten contacted by educational schools of all different sorts, elementary all the way up to college. And the college and high school ones are a little bit more straightforward because, we're actually trying to create some curriculum for them, because we can use that book directly to help those folks kind of learn more about themselves. But when we start getting younger than that, elementary school, just kids who are still growing, I'm very reticent to use the same material, because I don't want to label any kids too soon, right? I mean, we're basically balls of plastic. Our brains, our frontal lobes are balls of plastic that are forming from birth to age 22, 25, something like that, right? And so we're learning, we're like sponges. And so we don't want to label people, oh, you're not adaptable, oh, you're not this, right? What we want to do is we want to throw as much stuff in front of their windshield so they can experience, because what it's about is what attributes do you actually have. And it's a very short piece in the book. I talk about what I call dormant attributes. And these dormant attributes are attributes that we actually have a predominance of, but we don't know we have them because we've never been put in a situation that's expressed that, right? So the way you can kind of think about this, any of your listeners who are listening right now can think about this is, and by the way, I apologize, I'm right near Oceana, so those are F-18s.
That's the sound of freedom. That's the sound of freedom you hear in the background. It's okay. Yeah, so, that's part of being in this area.
That's right, totally. It's cool. And they have the pattern. Anyway, anybody who's listening who can think of a story in their lives that ends with the phrase, "I didn't know I had it in me," is a story of an attribute, a dormant attribute coming to the fro, right? And so that's the key. Is sometimes we have these attributes we don't even know because we've never been put in an environment that's tested and teased that out.
Yeah, I was doing an interview a couple of weeks ago, and we were talking about discipline. And the older I get, the more disciplined I become with almost everything, from the morning routine to how I wake up, what I do first, and all these little things, because we see how you thrive with discipline, right? But what's interesting is the conversation went in a way where I said, I went to Catholic school for 9 years at St. Gregory's in Virginia Beach. I had nuns. My mom made sure I had the nuns every year. I mean, we had immense, strict relationships where you had to do certain things. I mean, I remember a nun walking behind me saying, "You're walking like a duck, walk straight." I mean, it was intense, right? And then my dad was a disciplinarian and someone that believed that you followed the rules. And if I said this, you did it, right? And I hated it. So getting out of high school, like, what do? You're like, I'm an entrepreneur. I'm a thinker. I rebel. I'm not doing any of these things. And yet what happens is that that dormant comfortability and discipline, which I had grown up with, only helped to build discipline in my life in better ways as I got into my career and my life. And so I bring that up because it was like, I knew how great it was. I knew that it was the way to success, but applying it and then getting comfortable with it, and what made me comfortable with it while other people aren't, was something that I really felt was driven towards some of the old things that I just was very, very okay with.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. Let me land on that for a second, because I talk about discipline in the book, and I make a distinction in discipline between discipline and self-discipline. Okay, and it's important. It's an important distinction, and I had to look at myself and do introspection and kind of look at the world around me to make this distinction. But discipline, as described in the book, is what I would define as the ability to set and achieve those longer term goals that the outside world has a say in whether or not you accomplish. Okay, this is, putting together a podcast, become the great salesperson, become a Navy SEAL, writing a book. Okay, these are all things that the outside world is going to have a say in whether or not you accomplish. You're gonna have to navigate the outside world to do it, right? Self-discipline are those goals and endeavors that you embark upon that the outside world has no say in whether or not you accomplish. That is, I'm going to eat right, I'm going to work out every day, I'm going to do whatever, right? The outside world, I can make a decision to eat better, and then I can be in Vegas next week at a buffet. The buffet is not going to throw pastries at me, right? It's up to me, right? So the reason why I separated these, because the way I look at attributes, I always look at attributes in the sense of, an attribute becomes one of the codification processes to define it as an attribute is, can it exist on its own? Can it exist independent of anything else, right? And when I asked the question about discipline and self-discipline, can discipline exist without self-discipline and vice versa? The answer became yes, because I know people, and I'm sure you know some of these people, who are extraordinarily, and some of these people I knew when I was a younger guy, right? They were young people. Extraordinarily self-disciplined. They had the routine. They ate right. Everything was spot on, right? Couldn't get a long-term goal accomplished to save their lives, right? Then there are people who are highly disciplined, right? They get long-term audacious goals accomplished all the time. They have zero self-discipline, and when I looked at myself, I was actually one of the latter ones. I'm actually really good at discipline. I can set and achieve audacious goals really well. I've done it throughout my whole life. My self-discipline is miserable. Now, I wonder, because you brought this up, I went to Catholic school too, up in Connecticut growing up. I wonder if that kind of indocts you to hating rules, right? And kind of like, but I'm someone who says, I hate being told what to do, even when it's myself telling me what to do, right?
Yeah.
So this idea though, that really the reason why I want to bring this up is because success, success is generally subjective. It's subjective to the human being, right? And so when people start thinking about, okay, how can I be successful, or why am I not successful? These distinctions start to matter, right? Because someone can sit in there, it's like, I don't know what it is. I mean, I eat right, I do everything right, I do this, and this, but I can't seem to get this long-term goal. It's because they're high on self-discipline, they're low on discipline, And by the way, just for people who are actually saying, oh shit, this is me, one involves an ability to break from structure and routine. The highly self-disciplined person loves structure, loves routine, loves like, hey, this is what's happening, right? That if you're accomplishing a long-term goal and objective that the outside world has no say in, you better be willing to break routine. I mean, because the world is going to come hit you from every single angle. So your routine is going to be broken. You're not going to be able to eat right some days. You're not going to be able to get your workout on. You're not going to be able to you're going to have to operate in an will feel unself-disciplined manner, but it's really, those are the steps to actual overall discipline. Now, on the other hand, the best balance is those who can be disciplined and self-disciplined, because you can't have no self-discipline and expect to achieve long-term goals. There has to be a level of, okay, I'm just going to knuckle down and get this. And even me, who's lower on self-discipline, when it came down to it, I had to do what I needed to do to get ready for SEAL training. I had to do what I need to do to write a book, or I had to self-discipline my routine just to get stuff happening. So there's a balance there, but I think it's worth making that distinction.
I love that. What if you connect the dots between the two of them at the same time? So if as we're talking about this, I believe that my long-term vision has always been something that I've been disciplined about. I've known what it is and where I'm heading, and I readjust on a regular basis.
Right.
what I found is self-discipline allows me to succeed at that long-term
Yes.
disciplined vision. And,
Yes.
I'll give you an example. Part of the reason I have a morning routine is because I found that I didn't for many, many years like working out alone. So
Yeah.
I hired a personal trainer. I had a personal trainer I would go see. And because I liked being accountable to somebody, I liked giving of myself. I got to work with them. I got to be a part of it. And we got to learn something together every morning. Like it became a part of my routine. Today, I do it all alone. I don't have time to do the things that I wanted to do before because the goals have gotten a little bigger and the time's gotten a little tighter and the
Yeah.
family's gotten a little bit,
Yeah.
tighter on their time.
Yep.
So I have the self-discipline today to get that done, but I had to create all these little routines and I visualize them as feeling accomplished. When I
Yes.
finish in the morning, I actually feel like I've gotten something done before the days began. And, whether it's the cold plunge or the sauna or whatever it is, like I can handle whatever happens as the day goes on because I've kind of taken care of that. But connecting those dots is the long part of my story that
Well, you just keyed in on the secret. The secret to someone who is lower on self-discipline, because I'm asked all the time, because I am one of those people, is to start implementing routine and structure and to stick to things. If you can stick to things, you start generating these reward responses. You start generating the dopamine stuff, right? And so one of my he's a dear friend of mine. He and I met him shortly after I got out of the Navy, but he's a neuroscientist up in Stanford. His name is Andrew Huberman. Has a great podcast called the Huberman Lab, and he and I talk about this and would talk about this a lot in terms of setting up routine and structure so that you generate these little rewards, but those of us who lean towards the lower on self-discipline have to really be diligent about that stuff, because we're okay. Like, oh, the day's going to shit. That's fine. I'll just work it out, right? We're okay with that. And I don't care if I can't eat what I need to eat. We actually like that, right? We like that environment. Whereas, but if we implement some routine, some structure, I remember one of the times I was in the best shape of my life was actually when it was early in my career. I just moved back here from Hawaii. Was my first duty station. I moved to Virginia Beach. And I was part of a SEAL team here, and I was assigned to an aircraft carrier as an L&O. So I was basically going to do a deployment on an aircraft carrier, which was I had to do it because it was the only job available. I love I wanted to be a pilot anyway. I mean, I chose to be a SEAL, but I love aviation. So I was like, okay, if I'm going to do it, I want to do it on a carrier. All this to say, I was a SEAL trapped on a ship, right? And I remember that deployment, I just got into a routine. I just got into a daily routine of working out, doing this. I got in the best shape of my life, and the time went fast because I chose to initiate a self-disciplined routine. So it works. It's the key to that if you're a little bit lower on that. And if you're lower on discipline, if you're someone who's highly self-disciplined but can't seem to get those long-term goals accomplished, then you have to go the reverse. You actually have to start throwing some adaptability, throwing some uncertainty. You have to start throwing some curveballs into your routine and start practicing being okay with deviations. And then of course you deviate, but I'm going to go back to it. Deviate and I think that's the balance that works the best for highly successful people.
You almost have to get comfortable with imperfection.
100%.
If you could search for excellence, but if you don't get comfortable with the imperfection of the goal, whether it's self or long-term discipline and vision, then you're always hating on yourself.
Yeah.
Because it is really, just look at diets. And by the way, I love Huberman's podcast. That's a great one. I didn't know about it. My brother texted me one day. He was like, this guy's awesome.
Yeah.
And so it's great podcast. But either way, I think that it's really important to be okay. And maybe that's another part of this, that is just being comfortable with that failure, being comfortable with failing forward, learning from the mistakes and being okay with eating a couple of extra chocolate chip cookies, even though they're not a part of your diet.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah. Well, comfortable with failure and more comfortable with, just like you said, uncertainty and adaptability, because sometimes things are going to happen. Again, adaptability is all about how do I adjust to an environment that's changing around me outside of my control. And the more you're okay with that, the more adaptability you have. The less you're okay with it, the less you have. The super over-indexed self-disciplined person is typically not as adaptable. They're lower on adaptability, right? And so because when the environment changes around them outside their control, they're like, ugh, I don't like this, right? So yeah, it's about getting comfortable with just new environments. And and again, doing any one of this, whether it's getting comfortable with adaptability or getting comfortable with, with routine and structure, it's going to inflict discomfort for the person trying to do it who's not used to doing it. It's all about just, making yourself uncomfortable.
Yeah. Well, I want to go back to something else you were talking about, because I was very interested in the education component. So, if I look at the youth of today, I'm not one of those people that likes to label everybody with, they're all soft, they're all,
Yeah,
not going to be anything. Like, I think that's all crap for the most
I
part.
agree. Yeah.
But I do believe that there's a little bit of a trend of being very uncomfortable with any level of discomfort. There is a little bit more of a trend of the everybody wins and I want my trophy at this point in time. And that the competition, the competitive edge, which I think you have listed under the other,
Yeah.
under your attributes, I feel like it's one of those things that almost is being, muted a bit. And I'm just interested when it comes to education, and when you look at, I understand the difference between the young kids and the older kids. So if we want to just focus on the older kids,
Yeah.
I'd love to see them a little bit more comfortable with a bit of discomfort.
Yeah, well, and I think so. So let's dive in and first of all, let me talk about competitiveness and non-competitiveness, because it, in fact, has very little to do with uncertainty. The way I speak about competitiveness and non-competitiveness is from a mindset standpoint. In other words, the people who are higher on the competitive scale look at the world differently the people who are higher on the non-competitive. And I just, again, when you write a book, it's a lot of introspection, and
Yes.
and then you look around you and say, and I am not a competitive person. I never have been. I've never been one. I was the captain of my lacrosse team in high school, and it had nothing to do with my skills. By the way, it was all my attributes. My coach saw my attributes, not my skills, because I wasn't the best player. But I remember I was never emotionally moved when we won or lost, right? I really wasn't. I was like, okay, whatever. Now I had to fake it because I didn't want to look weird in front of my teammates, right? But I was like, I'm not competitive, and I thought this would inhibit my ability to be a SEAL, because I was like, okay, wait a second, this I don't know, and so I was worried about it until I got to SEAL training, and I recognized that SEAL training honors both polarities, right? And the reason why they do is because of it's about a mindset. The competitive mind, right, goes into an environment and immediately says, okay, what are the rules and restrictions and conditions inside this environment, inside of which I can win or lose, right? Because that's what competition is, win or lose, right? That's what it is. So how can I win in this environment? The only way you can win is to identify rules and regulations and conditions that define winner or loser, right? That's what the competitive mind sees, and that's how the competitive mind looks at the world. The non-competitive mind goes into an environment and says, I don't care about rules. Okay, I'm just gonna what's new here? What can I do? I don't care about that. I don't care about that. We're okay. We just look at the environment completely differently. Now, where the reason why it's in this chapter of the others is because every high performing team honors both polarities. Because when you're playing an infinite game, which is a non-competitive game, it's kind of punctuated by finite games, which are competitive games, right? And so in any environment, sometimes that mindset is going to be very valuable. Hey, we got to go in here. We got to look at what's going on. We got to understand how to win. Sometimes the mindset is, no, we're not going to look at that at all. And the way to describe this is just SEAL life, right? Navy SEAL. Sometimes a combat mission is pretty much defined. It's like, hey, we're going in there. This is what we're doing. This is what we have to do to win, right? Sometimes you look at a mission, you're like, wait a second. What's a completely different way? Let's ignore what we're seeing here. What's a completely different way we can look at that? So when you have both of those mindsets, you actually have the highest level of team and performance. So I'll start there. Competitive and non-competitive. Think of it more as a mindset versus a thing. Now, in terms of getting uncomfortable in our youth, this is, so I, just like you, I think it's largely bullshit, because I want to make sure that I'm always, one of my goals as I get older is not to become a dinosaur. I do not want to be that old dude just looking at it. It was like, oh, back in my day and this and
Yeah.
that. Like,
It was always better. It was always better when we were growing up.
And oh, by the way, that's all neurological, by the way. It's because our frontal lobe is forged from the age of birth till 25, right? And so whatever happens in those years are inevitably like forged as our, quote, best years. That's neurological. That's why we feel that way. But but I always think of it in terms of like, and you have kids too, and you have teenagers, right? We can't raise our teenagers the same way we were raised, right? It's a whole different world. There's different stuff involved. And so I tend to say, okay, what is it in fact? The level of uncertainty, the level of discomfort, the level of challenge. I don't think it's not that it's not there. I think it's just changed, it's morphed. What are those things that are uncomfortable and challenging and different for the kids of today's generation versus when we were? Now, some of us tend to look at like some of the old codified environments such as sports and athletics as ways you can just inflict some of that. But even that, athletics is not uncertain, and that's the thing. People always talk to me about uncertainty and like, well, what about sports? And I was like, listen, unfortunately, for the large majority of sports, there are exceptions. There are certain environments. There are certain environments inside of which you know exactly what's going to happen. There's not. It's a win or lose thing. Now, I will say there are some sports that are highly uncertain. Okay, those are things like fighting, like MMA fighting, wrestling, things like that, where you don't know. Rock climbing. Okay, this is where you don't know what the environment's going to do. There's uncertainty here. By the way, those are the folks who do better at like SEAL training and things like that. And when it comes to athletics, so sometimes you see those Division I, I don't know, football, baseball, basketball players, they come and they quit right away. And again, there's no judgment here. Just when I started thinking about how the brain works, some athletics provide more uncertainty. And so, but I think all this to say, I believe that really it's about us trying to better understand, like when I say us, guys like you and I, right? Trying to better understand, okay, what are those discomforts of today's youth? What are they actually facing that's just different than what we were facing? Because again, we grew up in the 80s and early 90s, right? There wasn't much discomfort back then either. I mean, we weren't running from bears, right? I mean, we didn't have to go hunt for our own food. So there were things in our environment that old people looked at us and said, these kids aren't. They're not learning anything, right? They're not experiencing any discomfort, right? And here we are saying, no, we actually did, and we're fearing that the kids now aren't. So I don't know. I think the problem is us.
Well, I do too. Listen, we got to the bus this morning, and my kids went to Catholic school. My last one's still in Catholic school, so I genuinely appreciated the discipline that I got, even if I hated it.
Yeah.
I now flipped on that, and I love it. But it's raining today.
Yes.
And my son gets out, puts his hood up, and he leans into me and goes, "Dad, these kids are so soft." And I said, what are you talking about? He goes, "Look, their moms are all walking them to the bus with umbrellas over them." And I said, yeah, I can't argue with that.
Yeah.
I know the power that mom has over life. I remember coaching soccer. We talked about a mutual friend of ours who I coach his son in soccer. And I remember making the rule. I was like, all right, moms and dads, you cannot come onto the field if your son or daughter falls down. I have to handle it as the coach because
Right.
I will help to develop and build their confidence that they can get back up.
Right.
But if I allow you to intercede, you will make it too comfortable and they will like that response more because nothing matters to them more than your love, affection, and acceptance. Yeah. And that was almost like a really big, I don't think I could do that today. I don't know that today, if I was coaching the same kids, I would be able to get the parents to agree the way that I did back then.
Yeah. I'm optimistic that the majority of folks out there would be okay with that, because I think the toughest part of parenthood, and this is where you kind of see the helicopter parents versus the ones who are not, is letting kids take the fall, right? Even and letting kids scrape their knee and letting kids ride the bike and and fall off a few times. And so I think actually it's funny because letting kids ride I was just thinking about the bus today. My son, so my eldest drives to school. My youngest could, in fact, he's a freshman. My eldest is a senior. My youngest actually could ride with his brother to school, but my youngest says, no, I want to ride the bus because his friends are on the bus and all that stuff. Well, I remember back when they first got on the bus, right? And putting your kid on the bus when they're young like that is a big deal for parents. It really is. Yeah. We all know that who have been through it because it's an uncontrolled environment, and you learn a lot of, just to put it to quite bluntly, bad shit on the bus, right? The bus has everything. They have the bad language, they have the bullies, they have all. And my wife and I made a conscious decision because there were some neighbors who we know who they just said, no, I'm just going to drive my kids every day, right? And they did. They're driven their kids every single day. They've never ridden the bus. And my wife and I made a conscious decision. said, you know what, we're gonna do the bus thing. And there was one point, my eldest, where there was a bully on the bus, and the bully was kind of just doing his thing, and we considered, we're like, hey, should we still, what should we do here? It's like, you know what, he's gonna stay on the bus. We're gonna work this out. We're gonna help him work it out. He was a little younger, so it wasn't like we said, hey, go, you go work it out. We helped him with that,
go
right?
punch him in the face.
Yeah, but we still said, but it's not gonna. You're still gonna be on the bus. We're still gonna do this, and I think these are ways that we as parents, again, we talk about throwing things in front of their windshield. We can help our children by letting the rope out a little bit, letting them risk, letting them fall down, letting them hurt, so that they get used to this idea that that discomfort actually does, you grow from it. You get rewarded. Right? Another thing Huberman and I talk about is this idea of the reward that you get when you step into your fear. I mean, as soon as you step into fear, a switch goes off in your brain, that fight response, and you get a dopamine reward for that, right? And so we're designed that way, and it's only in allowing our kids to experience that type of stuff that we can help them feel those rewards and understand, oh, wait a second, it's good to stretch, it's good to challenge, it's good to push. And I think in whatever endeavor it is, it could be sports, it could be music, it could be academics, whatever that is, let the rope out a little bit, there's so much courage involved in being a parent. Yeah. If you are parenting the right way, and a lot of the times the right way is let the rope out, let them fly away a little bit.
In every relationship, challenge builds a stronger relationship, including with ourselves.
Yes.
So the key component, I think, is, with the challenge, it's different. And I think you made a great point in that we do have to meet them at a different spot today. We have to acknowledge, I was talking with a friend just 2 days ago, and they were asking me, they've been much more successful than they grew up. And I had this same endeavor, it was like, man, everything I believed in, I don't actually do anymore. And, because everything I believed in came from a scarcity mindset. Everything I believed in growing up came from not knowing these things existed. Right. So I was explaining my son driving to school in a newer truck. Right. And I said, I did something I thought I would never do, but financially it made more sense. Here's what I learned. He has something to lose, where I started with nothing to lose.
Right.
And his mindset is starting at a higher level, which is really interesting to me, because I met him where he grew up, not where I grew up. And trying to make kids go back the way you grew up is often a recipe for disconnection and a really struggling parent-child relationship. Not to say that I've got it figured out, because I don't.
No, none of us do. None of us, but you're right, because it's basically setting up an environment where your kid says, "This guy doesn't understand. My parents do not understand." Right, and they're always going to say that. By the way, teenagers always do. But if you've done it as best you can, you've let them know, hey, I will see you at your space. And by the way, if you do that, they become more open to seeing some of your spaces as well. And one of the examples is this, because I've been teaching my kids, well, my son now knows how, my eldest is driving. I taught him, and I'm teaching my youngest right now. But I teach them I have a 1984 Jeep CJ7. I bought it in 1989. Okay, that's when I bought that car. So I've had it since high school. It is a 5-speed stick shift, right? And I trained my eldest son. Taught my eldest son how to drive on that car. I'm training my youngest son how to drive out the car. And I tell them the reason why I'm doing it is because when you train in a standard transmission, right, you are actually learning the nuances of the vehicle in a way that you don't get in the newer, car that does everything. Everything that happens in that Jeep, you have to do. Whether it's the windshield wipers, the light, you have to do it, right? And you don't have time. Like the one thing you can't do when you're driving the Jeep is be on your phone, right? You have to be 100% focused on what you're doing, where the road is. You start to get focused on the smoothness with which you feel the vehicle, because you're doing the gearing. And they get it, and they really embrace it, because they're like, this. It's an old thing. It's like one of Dad's old things that they're like, hey, I see how this is actually translating into my current life, right? But that's only existing because my wife and I have worked hard to develop this idea of, hey, we're going to see where you're at. That your experience is not like our experience. And we want to make sure that we're cognizant of that.
It's like a rhythm. The car has a rhythm. And when you're in tune with that rhythm of the vehicle, you can't be in tune with anything else. It's part of the reason I started doing cold plunging and things like that is because I found my brain goes so many places, but when you're there, you can
Yeah,
only be there.
you're only
And
there. Yep.
it's like a centering that really helps me shuffle everything and add clarity. And that driving of the stick, I learned from an ex-girlfriend years and years ago. And we were in a parking lot. I don't think her parents would have appreciated that we were, that I was killing that car,
Yeah, killing the
but
clutch. Yeah.
I had motivation to learn because she could do it and I couldn't.
Yep.
And then my wife, who I've been with since we were teenagers, basically, she had a stick and I learned and I knew how to drive it. So
Yeah.
I didn't have to
Right.
turn over the ability to never know that. So I'm glad that you're teaching your kids. I've
Yeah.
failed at that. I have not taught my sons that. So
Well, it's not, and again, it's not, there's no judgment here. It's just, it's a nuanced way. So it's an opportunity to show them some different ways to inflict a little bit of challenge and uncertainty and stress, right? And, it's, if you do this in this context and it's a little bit harder, there are certain things you're learning that you otherwise wouldn't learn. And I think that you can pull that whole philosophy out and plug it into almost any endeavor. If you just take, I mean, navigation, when we're in SEALs learning how to do just land navigation, right? It was map and compass. Even though actually GPSs we didn't have them back then, but even now to this day in modern day SEAL training, the basic stuff is done via map and compass because you have to understand some of those basics. You learn how to do it some of the hard ways before you start doing the easy way. It just lashes those neural networks and neural connections a lot better. So that you can actually you can understand, you have a greater understanding of the environment, and I think that's important.
that's why successful companies, when they're building a good culture, will often run people through the bottom to the top
Yes.
of every role, because the reality is if you don't know how to deposit a check, but yet you're investing somebody's money, you
Right.
need to understand the difference. You need to understand the time it takes. You need to understand all the attributes that go with
Right.
that task, or
Right.
you'll never fully comprehend managing or leading in that
That's right.
capacity.
Right. Yeah.
So
Here's one cool thing, because I've thought about this a lot. That there is a sweet spot, or there's a danger or a risk of doing that for the wrong things. In other words, it's on us to be diligent about what we're in fact asking our kids to do. Here, the example I'll give is this. There was, when my kids were going to school, even in grade school, there was a huge thing about them not learning how to write cursive. Okay, because they didn't teach it in school, and I kept on hearing people, it's like, I can't believe they're not learning to write cursive, and cursive is a foundational thing and all that stuff. And all I could think is like, wait a second, like, we are in an environment where, I mean, cursive was developed specifically because the printing press hadn't been invented and people needed to write faster, right? That's why cursive was developed, right? We are in a society where soon we're not even be writing anymore. I mean, the whole handwritten thing is going
right,
away. It's gonna, so my whole thing was, if you're forcing people to write cursive, it's like forcing people to etch stone. I mean, it's somewhat of a useless endeavor based on where we're going evolutionarily, right? So there's a job, I think, on our part to look at some of the things we did and really look at it with a good lens and say, okay, if this is something I really want to teach my kids or teach the youth, what are the reasons why I'm doing it? What are those things and reasons? It's not just because I did it. It's not just because I went through the hard stuff and they need to. And like deconstruct that stuff. And again, that's subjective. There may be some great reasons to teach kids cursive. I haven't thought through them, but who knows, but I think that's the type of calculus and interrogation that's required.
you should see my cursive from Sister Dolorine in the 5th grade. She
Yeah.
told me every day how horrible I was at writing. And I went back and looked at my 6th and 7th grade projects recently. I was showing my boys something and I was like, oh my, if I could write like that today, it would be amazing.
It
But
would be amazing. Yeah.
yeah, I almost think the entire school system is antiquated and broken, though. I mean, I can ask Alexa in 5 seconds the answer to a question, and yet we
Right.
ignore the fact that AI exists
That's right.
and that all these things exist. We're still teaching in that factory mode of sitting in a quiet space and
Yeah. Yeah.
listening. And
Yeah.
there's really, I know that there's some value, again, to being uncomfortable in the discipline. But if it were me, I would blow up the entire education system and rebuild it from the ground up and start
Yeah.
training and teaching kids exactly what they might need to learn to be successful in the real world, not the fake one that they live in while they're going through those worlds you know, of anxiety and toughness for all the
Yeah,
wrong reasons sometimes.
I totally agree. I think it's really more, it's less what to think and more how to think is what we should focus on. And I think I mean, there's obviously some basic stuff that every kid should have learn, basic arithmetic, basic English, basic history, things like that, some basics, right?
Yeah.
But after that, it should be I believe, a process of learning how to interrogate, learning how to question, learning how to introspect in a respectful way, by the way, because God knows we need that today, right? So, but learning to interrogate and think and ask questions and say, wait a second, you know, does this really make sense? You know, and do it in an inquisitive way, not a conspiratorial way. But I agree. I think that would be a good project, and maybe that'll slowly evolve to that. We'll see. But in fact, I'm confident it will. It just might not be as fast as we want it to.
Well, I think curiosity is part of the missing link between a
Yeah.
lot of these things. You know, I think when I look back at any level of success, friends of mine have had, people that I've known that have just been utterly successful. They've always been curious at different ways. They've been curious at what's working, who their competitors are. They're curious in policy and ideals and
Yeah.
ideas and values. They're competitive in wanting to get better, but they've kind of changed the link from win loss to win learn.
Yeah.
And when you change that link, like you're like, okay, curiosity becomes important. And you also find yourself very unlikely to become a sheep if you're
Yes.
curious.
Yeah. Well, I would say this because I think because I didn't put curiosity as an attribute in the book. Instead, I put open-mindedness because I think either works. Because you know, from an attribute sense, not everybody's curious. But I think it's important to be open-minded. And again, like I said, the way I deconstruct these is: can one exist without the other? And can curiosity exist without open-mindedness? Can the open-mindedness exist without curiosity? Obviously, the best case is to have both, right? But you can be open-minded without being curious, and that's okay, because again, that'll actually help you if you're low on adaptability, for example. Because if you're low on adaptability but you're open-minded, it's actually going to help you, right? So being open-minded. Can you be curious without being open-minded? Now that's possible and can actually be dangerous, because the curious person who's not open-minded is the person who tends to pick a direction and say, hey, it's this, and then go down that direction without being open-minded. So you can get into this situation where, for example, a leader who is convinced that this is the way to go, or that person did that, they will be curious in their closed-mindedness, right? So
Manipulation, almost a manipulation.
Almost a manipulation,
Yeah.
right? So there's the way these start to interact. There's always positives and negatives, and you can. But I'm really curious, no pun intended, because what it allows you to do is, if you start understanding the distinctions and how they interact and interconnect, you start really understanding your own performance. I mean, if you start saying, okay, wait a second, I'm low on adaptability, but I'm high on open-mindedness, but I'm low on curiosity, but I'm high on task switching. Wait a second, now I know exactly how and why I do what I do. And then you can say, okay, what lane should I be going in? And then you also can say, okay, what are the attributes that I actually do want to develop? Because it doesn't have to be all of them, right? It can be one or two, which is a lot easier than trying to be good at all of them, which is impossible.
Isn't it funny? And I don't know if you feel this way, but sometimes the older I get, the more I feel like I have out of body experience of looking down on what's happening in the moment and readjusting midway through. Where you revert back to old versions of you, like the 1.0, the 2.0, the 3.0, and you're sitting here at 5, 6, 7, 8.0, and you look back and you're like, I am not being curious, I'm being manipulative. I am not being loving or kind. I'm just being aggressive, or whatever it may be. You could kind of see the weakness. Maybe I'm getting too competitive and I'm focusing strictly on win-loss and I'm not focusing on learn. And I believe that. I don't know when that happens
well, it doesn't happen to everybody. You're actually lucky. I think you're fortunate. I count myself in that category. We're fortunate in the sense that we have, as we've gotten older, we've gotten better at what's called top-down control, right? Again, I love neuroscience. It's probably why Hubert and I really connected, because I just love listening to him, and we learn so much from each other. But top-down control is our ability to basically use our frontal lobe and manage our limbic emotions coming through, right? We can control that level of emotional outbursts, right? So obviously this is why teens and younger kids are so emotionally driven, right? Because their limbic brains are still forming, which means their frontal lobes are still forming, which means
Right.
their limbic responses are just out there, right? Some people, as they get older, so typically as we grow, we go, our frontal lobe gets developed, it becomes pretty strong. But some people, as they get older, they start going down the curve again. In other words, they get more emotional, they get less top-down control, they let their emotions take over more. This is the grumpy old man you'll see around, or grumpy old lady, right? Those are the people who just are pissed off about things. They just let that happen. I think curiosity, I think open-mindedness, I think introspection, I think humility allows for people to, as we grow older, we say, you know what? Actually, let me just, instead of my initial emotion, when I see that happening, instead of that initial, let me step back a little bit for a second. Let me understand why that might be happening, and I think it's a fortunate experience. I think that's part of, in my opinion, trying to stay young and not becoming a dinosaur.
Yeah. Well, I think we all aspire to be youthful. And I think, if you're coming on podcasts, if you're teaching leaders of the future, if you're interested in conversations like this, I always call it, like, when I started to visualize this podcast, my goal was always to think of the room. You've had a dinner with some friends, you've met some people, you knew a couple that was there, but you didn't know a couple other couples, and the party after dinner kind of splits into two parts. You have the part that's talking about the weather and whatever sports on TV or whatever it is. And then you have the group that's having the extra drink in the other room with no television. And they're literally just diving into topics that they might never forget in their lives.
Right.
Something that will be a imprint, and that could be forming a relationship with someone that they could develop into something much bigger later in life. And that's that growth mindset. I mean, and anybody doing the things that I know you're doing, obviously you're growing, you're creating a new version every single year. And what I know about researching you is you're helping other companies to do that as well. So can you do me a favor and just share with our listeners how they get more of you, your message, and really what you're most excited about into the future as we wrap up today?
Yeah, thanks, Scott. Well, so yeah, the best way is the website, theattributes.com is where you can find all of us, all of our stuff, all of my stuff. You can get my social media handles there. In fact, that's probably the best place to get the social media handles, because they're not, I think there's, I've been finding out there's some people who are mimicking, they're trying to mirror social media. So if you're going to get it from my website, that's the right one. But yeah, all the stuff's there, and the work we do, you can look at picking up the book there as well and reading more about the attributes. And so, yeah, that's kind of the one-stop shop, is the attributes.com. And yeah, I very much appreciate the opportunity to come here and talk and be on your show, and I think it's cool. Well, I'm sure we'll run into each other. We'll stay in touch. Maybe have coffee here, sometime soon in the new year. That'd be fun. So
100%. Well, I suggest everybody pick up the book. I am more and more interested in the 25 attributes after this conversation. Rich, you've been an amazing guest. Thank you so much for being a part of the show today, and I look forward to bumping into you in the future.
Thank you, my friend. Great to be here.
I hope you enjoyed this podcast. If you liked it, there's more where this one came from. Click here and enjoy some more.